Hi, everyone. Thanks for coming to e-flux tonight. It's my great pleasure to introduce Maria Linz, who will introduce her guests for tonight, Mary Walling Blackburn and Doug Ashford. This will be the first of 2 nights of talks with artists that Maria is doing. And the premise is, it has to do with a conversation, actually there's something that we've been talking about for a couple of years, which Maria has been saying, which is that now it seems that while so many arts institutions in times of financial austerity, of infrastructural austerity, it seems to be that there is a creeping concern among arts institutions and among artists themselves that favors infrastructure over actual content of work, right? So it seems that some kind of center of gravity is shifting within arts discourse, but also maybe even within the thinking of artists themselves, away from something that maybe we once thought had to do with the content of artwork or the content of exhibitions, and has moved towards infrastructural issues, financial issues, issues of survival, basically, right? So in the midst of issues of survival, how do we begin to have conversations about art again? And so the idea that Maria had for this was to focus on one work by each artist. So tonight, we have the first 2 artists, and it will be followed tomorrow night by conversations with Emily Segal from K-Hole and with Naeem Mohaiemen. So don't forget to come tomorrow as well. And I'll turn it over to Maria.
Thank you, Brian, and thank you, e-flux, for allowing me to do this. I'm really happy to do it in this context, which is an artist-driven organization, which has served as an inspiration for me for a long time. And just as you said, Brian, I feel strongly today that it's important to talk about artworks. The most immediate question would maybe have been 10 years ago, what is an artwork? But right now, I think that the question about what an artwork does is more relevant. In the spirit of thinking performatively about things, thinking maybe not so much about genesis and origin, but actually what happens when it's out there in the world, in different situations, in different contexts. And to be able to discuss this tonight with Mary and Doug is really exciting, and to continue tomorrow with Naeem and Emily. It's in the spirit of informality rather than formality, which means that you will be invited to join the discussion. There will be brief introductions, first by Doug, 10 minutes approximately, and then by Mary. And then we continue talking together and hope for your engagement in that. So one artwork selected by each person is the premise, and to think about what an artwork does. Doug Ashford, the floor is yours.
Thank you. That works? Yeah, wow. So, I'm too fat for this room. I didn't really prepare. I just found some writings, and Naeem and I, about an hour ago, pulled out a few quotes. I'll try to make this actually 10 minutes. These are maybe tangential pieces of text in relationship to the images, but hopefully I'll be able to describe the actual work very quickly by the end. What we may know from abstract painting is that it deploys form in order to steal experience away from the present, showing perhaps that the experience of a thing's usefulness often conceals what it actually is. If we could somehow disentangle ourselves from the utility of existing things, then their characters may begin to reveal a more secret character that would affect life. In an abstraction, then, things can be forgiven for their separation from the human, because their built nature, their ideological manufacture, could be assessed. Historical continuity could become opened into fiction, and we could discuss what we are or who we may become. When an abstract form confronts the facts of existence as presented to us by power, things are allowed to betray their usefulness. This talk is about the work that I've made that may examine such a confrontation, questioning how an artist's practice could modify the servitude we have in life, a life designed by efficiency and idealism. To see how artworks might help stop the reproduction of progress. As inactive and exhausted, life might appear as something apart from any capacity to function, and therefore be spared from the emptiness of utility. I'm sorry, the first photograph was a painting I made a long time ago. It's a nocturne. It's a painting of stars in the sky. This is as a way of introduction to the work. This is a photograph of the Black Student Union's occupation of Cornell University in 1968, which I witnessed when I was 10. In a strange way, the present's economic and technological brutalities seem to be making stable sharing circles more present than ever, for the one group very significant to me above all others, my students. I feel very lucky to be close to their experiences. I have now one of the most encouraging generations of learners that I have ever been with. They've seen, a number of them are here, so thank you. They seem to be trying to hold on to a very anti-modern idea of a productive difference between art and the art system. I don't want to and don't really have time to overly analyze why this might be the case today, or what the reasons are for it. But as the world they are thrown into becomes more and more creative, and yet more and more blind to meaning, they seem to be able to realize that only in each other can clues to a liberating present be purloined or stolen. I'm in love with the notion of the imaginary present that they provide, something that has to be taken away or stolen from the relentless management of time, something with the very tools that are producing that system of management may be refashioned. It occurs to me that this process, however socially revolutionary or even practical in the end, after all, they do graduate and they become artists, is by definition an abstract process, an act of taking something away. Good artists, like good criminals, know that the retrieval, this is a photograph of the dazibaos, or large character posters, which were posted on a wall in Beijing around the end of the Cultural Revolution, which is a time in which the idea of self-annotation, or the idea of the distribution of information, could become a public one that was built through sort of autonomous relationships between people in a direct way. Good artists, like good criminals, know that the retrieval of autonomy from the increasingly regulated arena of public life mandates a different kind of understanding of the forces that produce and manage that control, its precarity, and the art systems that are starved by it. This may mean by bypassing 19th century models of the centrally organized collective action for the possibility of different kinds of subjective rebellion could inspire a formulation of new models. Instead of repeating the critical forms that are already in alignment with the kind of macro spectacles, artists and critics are in a place in which we could force new recognitions of the institutional locations of power and how we may work with them. The competition and reconciliation between friends, the memories of lost intimacies, the chance alignment of personal and public desire, all could provide new cultural forms that would avoid simple sociological reductions. Other transgressive potential seems to lie in artisans as artists as kind of citizen loiterers, refusing to accept that which is already scripted for them, that's progressive or affirmational, to agree to the conditions of being lazy, exhausted, and ineffectual in relationship to the institutional power. Stealing and altering the spaces and signs that make up the city or the institutions within it for their own uses, artists can model the act of claiming the modern life that other inhabitants could also view and use in their own contexts. Oh, there it is. Okay. How's that look? Not so good. There is a huge reservoir of feeling I've discovered after beginning to make abstract work that's produced by abstraction. Daily, as the dark impartiality of economic systems that tear life apart, and rarely, more rarely, the brighter possibilities of a kind of distanced view. Both positions of looking, the dominant one and maybe the more marginal one, of looking and thinking and making, are incandescent in a way because they are both separated from the space of reality. The works in this room of paintings are between the dark and the light, suggesting the chance to transport oneself to places for thought or to work on history differently. The photos in the room are chosen both for their report, what they can actually tell us, and for their image, for what motivates the figures depicted. Figures who, although are twisted and sinister, are also perhaps beautiful because they are responding to a disaster, moving through a disaster as if empathy has taken its own momentum and could overcome catastrophe. Disaster creates times of extraordinary affection because it suggests a different kind of duration beyond the economies of getting and selling. This shifting economy might be like looking at abstract visual forms, especially when such forms are made carefully, I felt, somewhat geometrically, and with a certain kind of gravity, a gravity between the relative meaning of people in terms of their own life experiences and the immediate contingencies of how they would want to force or allow that life to have a different possibility to the future, a kind of deferred identification. Immediate, because the lack of objective reference to an abstract form means recognition beyond rational debate. And deferred, because this visual pleasure causes us to look elsewhere for definitions, leaves us with less of an anchor back to the real, leaves us in another unexpected state, in anxiety. Amidst every abstract form in this room of paintings, or amongst the abstract forms that are in this room of paintings, is a group of people. They're photographed to depict themselves, because they're photographed by themselves, in a kind of unstable connection to what they feel it means to be an American, to what it means to live successfully and economically in a state of security, to what it means to propose their identity to the world as coherent and without flexibility. We do sometimes know, however, that in the calamitous event that is existing behind that identity, we can become subjects of a different kind of identification with each other, one in which we're not replacing the other person. We understand their strangeness to us. It is, in a way, a kind of a distance that I'm hoping is reflected in the abstract paintings themselves. Oh. So this work is the latest thing I've done, and I don't completely understand it yet, but it's called Bakersfield, California, because its origin is from a box of negatives that I found in an abandoned room where I work. And I know that those photographs are from Bakersfield, California. They depict the family, and particularly the physical growth and life of this man on the right, who you saw here in Nazi regalia. his family, the people around him, people who I don't really necessarily know their identities. We follow this one man in particular from adolescence to middle age. All along, depending on where we are from or where we would relate a sense of identifying ourselves as part of a group or a clan, which may be the wrong word, given the fact that they are clearly white supremacists, as something that could shift, or the presentation of something that is going wrong. The motorcycle in the living room, the cigarette smoke in the lens, and as you saw before, the swastika on the jacket. So I think my 10 minutes are up. That's it. I'm sorry? Or we could look at it all together.
Yeah, because it's quite significant how you decided to display them.
In 2 different places. It's been displayed differently. In Norway, at the Heine Onsted Center, it was presented as part of a kind of broken or dismantled or being constructed, yet to be fully constructed, archival case in which the glass that would create the kind of distance condition between you and the specimen was undone and spilling or exploding onto the wall and onto the floor. At the, I forgot the name of the place, Robert Miller Gallery. It's up now.
That's okay.
Sorry. The Robert Miller Gallery. It's displayed on the floor, as I showed you earlier, in a more kind of partial and kind of contingent way.
And maybe also to mention with the Henje Onsted Art Center presentation that the space itself is quite oddly shaped. It's not a rectilinear space, but one with unusual angles. So it gave a particular configuration to the installation, I think. That things are not basically straightforward.
Right. And then within the geometric patterning of the paintings, it suggested an idea of national identity because of a context of a flag, but yet they're also falling apart and in different states of scale and reproduction, repetition kind of, where the sense of not knowing what the image is would ideally, at least for me, be reflected in what it would be like to not really know what it would be like to be a Nazi.
If I can add a few things while
Please.
your image is still up, there is a sense in your painting where the presence of the hand is there, not because we can trace any moves of the brush, but because things are not rectilinear. There is a certain twist in them, so lines go a little awkward sometimes. It's not the kind of perfect abstraction that we've seen, geometric abstraction that we've seen a lot. And have you seen the show at Robert Miller Gallery? Anyone? Not so many. Have you seen the work in the flesh somewhere else? Some people have. It's quite amazing, I think, that they are like icons, like orthodox icons somehow. Small, concentrated, gem-like almost.
And portable.
Very portable, which is great for curators when we invite you because you can bring them in suitcases.
And the work I'm working on now would maintain its portability and be exhibited as a kind of contingent, having a even more contingent or fluid relationship to the document.
Great. Thank you, Doug. I think we should move on. also I should say that I'm really excited about having the two of you together. Somebody whose work I know very well, which is Doug, and somebody whose work I know a little bit, but I'm very eager to learn more. So this is the perfect occasion to delve further into Mary's work. Is everything okay?
Yeah, I'm just going to turn on the mic. Can you hear me? All right.
So.
So?
Now better.
Better? All right. All right, before I turn on the images here, there's a couple things that I would like to say before the image takes over or is precedent. And the first is just that this is a work that provisionally is called 666666. And it is it could be a provocation, and maybe it functions that way, you know, the mark of the beast, right? But it also functions as also just saying there are 6 of these, and there are 6 of these objects within this object. Now, this piece that I'm about to show was originally was in response. There's a curator, Natasha Marie Lorenz, who had invited me to be part of a social practice show. And we have this long-going struggle where she likes to insist that I make social practice work, and I like to tell her that I don't. So we both build these arguments towards and against. And this was, in a sense, an intervention, a penetration into my arguments against, in many senses, this form that we sometimes are confront or are documented within, you know, in someone's photograph. And so when I started like this, and now we'll begin with an image. All right. It went back. There we go. And is it on a timer? So I must. No. Okay. Okay. So basically, this piece here, I start small. I'm going to start closely, and so what you are closely looking at is on one side. And you'll be able to move around to the other side and see both at the same time if you were in that space. And what it says on the other side, there are things that it says. And it is an instruction of sorts. And that instruction, I think, here we go. And it says, dosing the pedophile piece. Locate pedophile, he is your mark. Secure acid, 20 hits. Wait for pedophile to attend community picnic /barbecue/family reunion. Secretly dose pedophile. 20 doses of pure LSD. Watch your mark lose his mind after he eats the corn dog, slice of watermelon, doctored. Don't tell anyone what you've done. Avoid jail. This is a social practice piece. So I think that here's the corn dog. And so there's a number of things that I'm trying to work through, around, against in terms of the sort of tenets of social practice. Not just to be a curmudgeon, but to also point to what I cannot be with. And one thing is that the presumption is that it is, with missionary zeal, one goes to a community that is not one's own, and one does something to them, which also does something for, I suppose, oneself. And so how does this function in it? Would be one way. Who is the community? Is there an outsider? Is there an insider? In this instance, you don't know yet, right? I haven't revealed to you who is the insider, who is the outsider within this. Another element of it is that you often see the photograph, and this refuses the photograph. And so there's an array of reasons we might refuse the photograph or refuse the document in this situation. And then, so those are two sort of elements at play. So let me go forward one. So this is the opposite side, and this is the direction, right? And so this direction means that you too could do this. If you can locate your own pedophile, and you can locate, a family reunion. Like, here you go. Here it is. Here's the instruction. And so, what if a social practice work is extra legal? If it is vigilante, how does it function? And so, I'm interested in something that is perhaps in some ways someone described it as both funny and violent. And that it is both things at once. So this is the close-up, right, of this particular aspect. Another aspect I would like to stress is that that I am also cribbing. I'm cribbing in tone and in structure from Lee Lozano's pieces, where she directs herself towards a certain rupturing act. Even though often the rupture is internal, this is a rupture towards the external. So here's where it hung at Reverse Gallery, and it is intentionally hung. Let's see. Again, I'm stealing. Again, I'm cribbing from, in my mind, how I see documents installed on the outside of a construction site in New York City, right? So there's a piece of plexi, and they are bolted in, and there's a piece of paper behind it. And so these are working documents that can be activated by yourselves. But could you? That's the question, right? That I might return to, who knows? And so at this point, and the other thing is that this is not acid-free paper, right? This is just newsprint. So it's not. It is an object, but it is an object that is a worthless object. It is not a collectible, and so that's also something that moves it outside of the photograph yet again. And here's the other side of it, right? So you're seeing 6 different possibilities, and we have let's see, we've got LSD and marijuana and sheriffs. And we have some things that have to do with pedagogy, some things that have to do with documentation. But I basically found and indicated within this project sort of 6 pillars of social practice that I knew could be, in some senses, undermined by these directives. And so, where did these directives come from? And that's what I want to speak more to now. And I'm gonna cheat a little and look at my notes here. And so basically all of these directives, when people read them, they presumed at the show that these are fictive, and they're not fictive at all. So these are all based on my maternal family and actions that they enacted in 60s and 70s. And so I also wanted to disrupt the chronology, the timeline of social practice. That when does it occur? Oh, well, it could have occurred decades ago. Who enacts it? Does the genius artist enact it, or is it a mesh of interlocutors, of kin? Did they enact it before that? And if they can't name it, is it it? And so I'm participating in this in some senses in formalizing it for them. And so, and they would usually be the kind of community that it is acted upon. And so, but here, there's a different sort of terrain of agency that I'm attempting to indicate. This one here, I think what it says is a marijuana garden for the sheriff piece, right? So you hear the piece for the, which is like the Lozano kind of echo. But this is about a garden that was, quote unquote, I say loosely, but somebody took some pot plants and they planted them in front of the sheriff's trailer in town so that when people drove by, they would see these pot plants. And so, again, we have, what is the legal action, what is the illegal action? And the people who are growing these pot plants, in this instance, it was my great-grandmother. And she would always say, Reagan is making me do this, and I have no choice. I have to supplement my income. And so, but her name isn't revealed in this. She's dead, so, snitches. And so, and here's another one, and this one here is called, and I will. Let me just go to the document for it. Actually, maybe I mislaid it, but I can speak to it. No, there we go. And this is called Butchering Mechanism Piece, and it says, gather chickens for slaughter, gather people to slaughter. Gather hatchets, all cut off, all the chickens' heads at once. All chickens will run around with their heads off, keep chopping. If you cannot keep chopping, begin dancing and singing. Dance and sing while chickens run and people chop. Sing the Dr. Pepper jingle. I'm a pepper, you're a pepper. Wouldn't you like to be a pepper too? Drink Dr. Pepper. And many of you may not recognize that song. But you sing this until the chickens stop running. This is a social practice piece in conversation with the choreographic Turn, 1970. Repeat each year. Fill freezer. Buy chicks. And so this is a piece that my great-uncle Denny activated. He was there at my great-grandmother Fanny's house. She had everyone there to kill all the chickens for the year. And my great-uncle Denny is a sensitive, tender person who's married into the family. And he couldn't handle the violence of the moment. And so his way of coping is to dance, right? So I think there's something very beautiful about his inability to assimilate to a family and his way of trying to use a pop tune to move out of a space of trauma. And so to me, this is a performative act. And it also, if we were to use again, I'll have this sort of tired mantra, but if we're to use another tenet of social practice, that there's an intervention into a space by another that is transformative. Can this be? Is this transformative? And in terms of the oral histories of my family, this is a story that's often told over and over and over again. And to both indicate the violence, to indicate another option, and to also laugh at other options. And I think that that's also something that people need to feel the texture of, is that when we think of sometimes is the display of peaceful alternative, that it can very quickly be recuperated and moved into the leisure of the violator. So these are sometimes cautionary too in how they function. And here's the back, right? And so there's a couple things I could say in my last 30 seconds, and that I think are really cautionary. And so one of the things that I wanted to mark is that Brian and I have had discussions in the past about throughout the art realm, there's often heard privately, I don't know, I'm not going to speak to a document, but this sense that that there is ownership and territory over works that come from our own experience, and that people should not speak to that which is not their selves. And I think Doug touched upon this a little bit when he says, oh, here, this is not myself. These Nazis are not me, but I am looking at their strangeness. But I think that there's often a way that we would say, well, because they're Nazis, right? They've forfeited this loophole that's very popular within the art realm to say people can only speak for themselves, right? But unless you're a Nazi, right? And so I think that, and I'm not trying to create a cul-de-sac for Nazis. I'm trying to just sort of lay out these kind of inconsistencies. And I think that, so here I am, and I can say, oh, I'm so justified. This is my own, marginal people who are in this sort of vibratory rupturing. So Lee Lozano, it's her own personal realm of vibratory rupturing, and a violence in it. And these are mine, and I can speak for them. And I think that the problem that I think that Brian and I were trying to tease out when we would have this discussion a couple years ago was that when we begin to ascribe authenticity, as you said a minute ago, when we were talking beforehand, and we try to ascribe these things to a certain people who speak for themselves, it also means that we're maybe saying that we also ascribe to authority, and I think that that's really a problem. So even as I know that some people will say, Mary has the authority, I also want to clearly say that's a problem. It's a problem with this work. So, and I guess the only other thing I would say is that I think I still go to this despite that, because I think that there is a way that these kind of stories that are from an extremely poor, violent, funny site are eclipsed. And when we think of an actual physical eclipse during the day, there's a funny kind of light that covers the terrain, and I think that light is important. I think that, can I politicize that kind of light as it hits these objects, my own or not? Thank you.
Thank you, Mary. So let me ask you a couple of questions about the actual execution and material configuration of this piece. Okay. So you said that it's poor paper. It's not acid-free.
No.
What is the technique otherwise?
What are the other materials? It would be a walnut oil, I guess, and it would also be probably a pastel. And most of the materials I ever use are scrounged, and I would say, and so they're often, the reason I'm a little fuzzy about their origin points is because I'll find it at a garage sale, like some artist who's given up. Don't do that. But it's, so there's this way that I will find materials and use them, and so that would be my answer.
And the images that you're showing now, was that the first time you showed the work?
Yes.
And the only time?
Yeah, and I think, and to me, it's an ongoing piece. So this was just the first 6, but to me, this is simply a sliver. Yeah.
But this is the way they're supposed to be presented, behind glass, front and back. Or plastic, yeah.
Yeah, there's not a frontality, and which I also, which I'm interested in.
Great, thank you.
Yeah.
So at this point, I would like to start with asking both of you if you want to comment or in other ways respond to each other.
Mm-hmm.
What if you invent the story?
Oh.
Because the idea of identity and sort of, what's the term again? Authenticity has to do also with biography, right? So what if you invent, well, you may have, and we don't know.
No, I really didn't, but
I had a feeling.
But, other people and families invent stories all the time, so what I think is true might not be.
Right.
Yeah. So in a sense, there's going to be some invention, even though there was somebody who recently wrote a chapter about my work, and he afterwards he said to me, well, I really fact-checked everything, and I was surprised you really weren't lying. So I think that there is a lot of ways that these stories seem outside of the real. But I think that you're asking this in a sense. It's curious to me because you have these people who are located in some of the same areas that my family was near. So my family was, picking cotton in Central California in the 1940s. And that's Bakersfield is in relationship to that, and so you're sort of in the fictive, non-fictive remains of their neighbors.
Yeah, because I was thinking about that in relationship to the document and the way that its flexibility is I mean, obviously related to memory, and then like reconstituted always within the family, like the way that siblings know the same event as completely different.
Yeah.
Because those photos, I know they dressed up as Nazis, but I don't know that they were Nazis, right? I know that I know people who are of me, or they go back from me, who were, right? So I know that. I know the scene, like the flavor and the sense of the scene, which is fascism.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, Doug, in relation to the particular photographs and the way you've worked with abstract painting here in terms of colors and shapes as well, what is the connection? Because you've worked with photographs and abstract painting together before, but there seems to be some sort of heightened intensity and maybe dissonance in the colors, for instance.
It's kind of always hard for me to put my finger on this, but in terms of the process of making them, I'm energized by that which is, in a sense, absent in the abstraction, that it would provide a context of like trying to work through something from a different place that would otherwise be unable to be documented. Which is why I asked about the fictionalization of the real, because the fictionalization of the actual event that you're speaking from is, in a sense, like part of the dilemma that I'm facing. I think it also has to do with social practice in the sense that my earlier work was invested in something that was always ascribed with a certain kind of ethical momentum, but was actually organized in a way on a much more abstract context of like trying to provide a context for emptiness that was full of other things, around which there would be juxtapositions that people would have to make judgments, which was the exhibition form. And for me, it's a comparative condition around trying to like figure out what something is in relationship to what we know what another event was that is interesting to me. And I felt that looking at yours too, because the corn dog, I'm sorry, that's not really a corn dog. And the way that the viewer would have to negotiate the different sides or different contexts of information in that work is also one which would, in the end, have to be speculative. And the form, or the shape, or the color, or whatever it is, the visual nature of it would like have to provide a place in which people would have to like agree or disagree together. I mean, I don't know any other way to say it, but sort of like negotiate the anxiety of something that's not identifiable and come to some kind of description or play or disagreement or something like that.
Yeah. In defense of the corn dog, it is a corn dog that is what one sees after you've taken the LSD. Right?
Okay.
So that's why it's in that color. But
Which is not a corn dog.
Right. And so, so that there's also, I mean, in that piece too, it's an abstraction of legal rule.
Right.
Right. And I also think that your piece is also, in a sense, an abstraction of legal rule. There's a way that that I want to see white supremacists punished, and part of that punishment is expose. Part of that, and so then you expose, right? This album, you've exposed it, you've laid it out, and so it ends up becoming extra legal punishment. And so if this was, I mean, I think that if we were to say, if someone was to say that your work wends its way back to its originary point, the original viewers see your document of the interface between their photos and the paint. You know. So I think that that's happening too, to me. Like cool. I can't help but imagine them looking too. I'm not looking alone.
And looking at the painting and saying, what does that have to do with me?
Yeah, them, you mean.
Doug, do you want to say something about how you came to work so intensively with abstract painting, retreating into the studio from having worked with group material and done this social practice type work for a long time?
I love what Mary said about the kind of, I don't know, the disaster of the idea of sort of seeing affirmation or progress within the construction of meaning. And the group material exhibitions always were very contingent in terms of a provisional kind of statement about ethics. Like, just for now, this is a problem, and we'll look it through. Mm-hmm. Just for now, we'll try to see the context of the development of the epidemic that was caused by government indifference, called the AIDS crisis, as a kind of hinge through which we would try to measure our own experiences, right? AIDS Timeline, that was a project by Group Material, documented the growth, or in a sense, the history of the epidemic in relationship to activism and documentary context around which people could remember the actual sort of historical facts, but also experience cultural associations with things like what song was playing in the discotheque, or what experience around identifying each other in a kind of abstract or non-rational way was happening simultaneously. So you could have the archive, and you could have a set of impressions at the same time. You could think of why someone was painting, for instance, The Wizard of Oz in 1989, while the virus was alive in and around them. Mm-hmm. What's my point with that? My point with that is that looking back and looking at the way that, in many ways, no longer the case because of the amazing work of my colleague Julie Ault, but at the time that history was seen as something understood as having a certain kind of utility, that the exhibition was activist, right? And a sort of activist or utilitarian relationship to culture was part of the inspirational context of the group, but was not actually that which I think built the form of the exhibition itself. That it was something different, that was based in abstraction, in the sense that the idea of an assembly would be empty until it's filled with other things. And that kind of emptiness as a sign of democratic potential, agonism, whatever, was something that I always sort of played with during the period of collaboration, and then wanted to make more palpable or give it an object status in the work that happened afterwards. But you're right, there's also a concomitant context of withdrawal, which would have to do more with a different, maybe different kind of emotional state of trying to wonder what it would be like to have a rebellion in a more kind of distant condition that's out of public discourse.
Yeah, and a more quiet one.
And quiet.
Maybe.
Yeah.
And the Bakersfield work, you've shown it in a couple of different contexts, and both of them are white cube type situations. Mm-hmm. What is your thinking about what the work does there? And are you interested in testing its doing elsewhere? Mm-hmm.
I mean, yes. I don't know. I mean, there's a lot of models sort of kicking around, at least in my mind, for ways in which the as a kind of as part of a generation that I don't know how to say this without sounding like a kind of a cliche, but sort of came out of a context of the early moments of institutional critique, where the idea that the object could become more of a process or more of a situation, no longer tied to the sense of its facture, the mystique of the artist, or, we know the dialogue. But for me, the kind of also camouflage position of painting is also part of how I think about it, that it attracts certain kinds of discussions because of its appearance as an object of value, that at least I find so far in showing them produces a certain kind of interaction. So the idea would be in some way to try to develop a way in which it would become more accidental or unconscious in a public way, but still maintain a context for it to be like deliberate. The difficulty is, at least for me, is the way in which I can manage that institutionally. Because my experience would be that you would want to create your own context for that, and I don't know how to do that yet. At least under the.
Are you open to proposals?
Totally open to proposals, but yeah, exhausted with labor,
Yeah.
from working.
Right.
Which I love, but it's work, and we have to be there.
Yeah. And Mary, about your work, you started out by identifying these 6 pillars of social practice and then stating your skepticism. And you ended up talking more about your family relations and actually authenticity. So can you say something more about what you think that this is doing in terms of the work? This tension?
I mean, I think that on one level, I don't have the kind of furious interest in kind of taking down any form. I noticed often that people will identify as painter or sculptor or social practitioner and be sort of virulently opposed to that which is not. And I think a lot of that is about precarity when they draw those kind of strict lines. And so that's what I see. But I'm still going to be extremely analytical about anything I'm looking at. And so when I look at social practice, I apply that same sort of fluorescent light. And so I would say that one is that I feel that one of the pillars is this, and I think I did say this in there, but one of them is determining the community that is not yours, that you enter. And so here I choose my family. Another one is to document it, and the document then serves as object. So even though there's this premise that social practice is outside of institution and object production, I still believe that the photograph becomes an object and a saleable object. And so I don't see that as being really being the deflection that it says it is. So that would be another. Another would be that something transformative happens, and that transformation is has certain sort of notions of what is positive and what is transformation. And I actually think both of those things are culturally produced, and most of these practitioners are upper middle class to upper class, if not by birth, by education.
Or
and
identity.
What did you say, Doug?
Or by identification.
And so I believe that when they have these notions of what is transformative, it's very, it's not the same sort of structure that I see within, say, that aspect, that part of my family. So that would be another. I mean, another pillar of it. Let's see. I'm trying to think if I hit them all. Another would be not necessarily a pillar, but I would say a theme would be farming. Right. So farming is a theme. The garden is a theme. Making food together is a theme. So one of these talks about my great-grandmother dropping all of the grandkids off at a field and saying, steal as much as you can, get back here at this time. She pulls the truck back up, they put everything into the truck, and they leave. And so here people are like, oh, here's this farm. And they're saying, well, what can we steal from this farm? And these are people who were sharecroppers. So, I mean, the relationship to labor and farm is very different.
It's fascinating. And if I come into the space where you showed this, would this be available to me, that part of the story at all?
No. So and parts of it wouldn't be. I mean, that's why some people thought, oh, these are just sort of glib. They're kind of saucy and disrespectful, which I think comes from the Lozano, the channeling of Lozano in the score. And there's two reasons that I would have done. I rejected that. So one is also in social practice, the artist presents themselves as authentic, as earnest, as someone who can be your friend. And I think that the other day I jokingly said, "Oh, I have lots of enemies," and then someone said, "Well, who are they?" And I said, "Well, let's start with the state." And I think that I think we have to be comfortable with having enemies, and I think we have to also be comfortable with listening to people that we don't really like, or that we don't like them all the time, or that they're complicated. That's why I really loved, say, for example, the notebooks of Griselide Israel, or looking at Cookie Mueller sometimes. Like, they're problematic. People would say they're fucked up. And so it's not just reading those books once they hit New Museum Bookstore. It's actually in a lived moment, actually saying, okay, I'm going to deal with someone, not because I think they're just an asshole, but I think they're an outlaw. And so that's why I don't want to be the earnest artist next to there. And also, I need to be held accountable for formal properties. So I need to be able to say, can this function visually? Can you get pleasure out of this corn dog that is not a corn dog?
I think also to be dysfunctional in relationship, not just to the idea of the functional, affirmational idea of the artist as a kind of evangelical interpreter of the world, but also to maybe be dysfunctional on the level that, and it's not just laziness per se, but it's the disability for you to provide the explanation. And we all know a lot of artists like this. They're not part of the industrial section of art making, right? They tend to be people who don't function well in contexts like this or contexts like galleries and museums. They don't feel the need to participate, right? And I think that that tradition actually goes back quite a bit in terms of the artist as Godard or people like that who are able to produce in a way in which is sort of outside and inside certain kinds of contexts.
You mean Andre Cutter, right?
Yeah. And not feel that they're always functional, that their work doesn't really have utility. The difficulty with, as Brian may have been alluding to in the introduction, is that the whole thing has to be sort of kept going somehow. And it is so functional. As Boris says, the parking lot of the Kunstverein is packed. It's like everything seems to work so well. It's a little. There's a moment for a certain kind of suspicion, also one of his terms, that you would relate maybe to the way that skepticism works through the fine art industry. And would be maybe why people are interested in withdrawing a little bit, or providing only sort of partial references to social problems.
But there is something in both works that both of you have touched upon, which is to do with a desire for more self-determination. And would you say that this is something that is unique to these particular works, or something that you would embrace more generally for other projects?
Depends what you mean by the self.
That's what I would like to know. Yeah, more what you think of that. Yeah.
Well, self-determination on the part of you as artist.
Yeah, you want to make the things. I don't know, maybe you should answer this more, because the way that you're able to perversely use the idea of biography within the work shows that I think that you have a greater critical command of what it means to be in public. I haven't quite grappled with it yet.
But why do you think it's perverse?
Say again?
Why do you think it's perverse, the use of biography?
Because she's presenting a context of her own experience as being, as she says, extra legal, right?
Yeah.
And my grandfather was in the John Birch Society, so I am also self-representing, but I'm not self-representing what those, in a sense, context of self as a group or as a figure mean. I'm sort of fantasizing about what it would mean to have actually loved or been close to them or felt empathy with them, right? In a world in which the disaster of their self-identification is always present, in the actions of the police and the organizations of the city and so on and so forth.
Yeah, Mary, please go on, and then we should see if there are questions or comments.
I mean, I guess it's interesting that we got to this point, because one of the things I was thinking about in response to Doug was I was thinking, well, when you asked the question comparing his group material work with this later iteration, is I was thinking, oh, well, could he explain them both as self-portraits, and to call them self-portraits, and what does it do to the self, the artist, and what does it do to the viewer when they have to hear them as self-portraits or expect them as that. So that was. So then you got there anyway. Okay. It seems like in terms of self-determination, I guess. It sounds so arrogant, but there isn't a lot that I don't. There's not a lot of backing down that I do, and so I think I used to think when I was young that I could fight everything all of the time, and I can't anymore. Maybe I don't want to fight everything all of the time, but I think that. It still is very natural for me to work through things and against them. I think, though, that the moment where, in art practice, where my self-determination might become more fuzzy, is that there are moments where if I'm working with another, that I will not that I can with their own vulnerability, maybe I forget where myself is in that moment, and maybe I'm not determining that. So, does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's like teaching.
Yeah. I think in teaching, when the student is laying bare what they're struggling with, then I'm not remembering who I am. I'm just feeling what they're saying. Yeah.
So there is a mic in Magda's hand. And another one here, maybe? Yeah. Thoughts? Questions? There's one.
Hello. Can you hear?
Yeah.
Yeah, very well.
I had a question for both Mary and Doug about, I guess, interior life or interiority based off of two things that each of you said. And I guess, like, for Doug, I was thinking about the beginning. You mentioned exhaustion and precarity leading to a desire for community. I was thinking that those two things tend to make it difficult to find community. Sure, it would be nice, but before you can even want to appear and join a community, there's some work that needs to be done inside if you're feeling exhausted or precarious. And then for Mary, I guess the question is, I was thinking about how you made this distinction from Lozano's work, which is about this interior experience, that many of those pieces were never shared or meant to be shared. It's archival work that makes them visible. But you drew a distinction between that and your piece. And then I was thinking about the way you narrated it, and although you said there was some discussion of social practice, it seems like it's more about your family and your relationship to a particular request made of you at a particular time about a show about social practice rather than social practice per se. So it's profoundly interior. And I guess that's the question.
Do you want to start, Mary?
Okay. Well, firstly, I guess because Lozano's scores are posthumously laid out and exposed, then they have to remain, pretty internal. But because I'm still alive, I feel that there's a way, and I've decided to open them up to the public. There is a possible way. I mean, if someone actually really did enact the riskier ones that I proposed, and that would be the work getting away from my hand in ways that I can't control. Maybe that will happen, maybe not. So that's one thing, is that it is now has entered the realm of possibility. I also, if it feels interior to you, I do accept that, because these are just speculative, these things I'm saying. But I also feel that these stories, as I said, are told by a lot of my family members, throughout their communities, which have nothing to do with this space. And I do think that they do provide blueprints for dissent. And so I think that they are repeated in different iterations, through other kinds of spaces. So yeah, I hope that answers it. Yeah. Thanks.
And that makes me think of like the conversation we were having in the 90s about the sort of parachute artist being the evangelical servant to the idea of the community. And at that point, there was a lot of interest in the idea of a community that wouldn't function, right? That is dysfunctional,
Okay.
right? At least by us, because of the utilitarian way that public art agencies were positioning group material as being that translator of the other, And part of the idea of the translation of the other, to me, is also related to abstraction, in the way that abstraction is always thought to be sort of the opposite of naturalistic identification, or being able to identify the thing as part of what you already know. And I think empathy is like that the idea of empathy is a kind of a form of replacement. And the idea that you would feel empathy for another person means that you are understanding them to be just like you, right? We say, imagine yourself in their shoes, right? But that means they're your shoes now because you stole them or you killed them or something, Like, even back then, in the sort of theoretical line of this, there are other people in this room who know much better than I do. There was a notion of an inoperative idea of community, which I'm thinking now is actually really beautiful. So community of like dead people, or a community of like people who are so fucked up they don't really work because they're tripping their brains out, and it has to be sort of provisional and in a sense also I think kind of invented, and then it has a real moment of evocation or embodiment, which would be the work of art or the exhibition or the book or the editing of the essays or whatever it is, but that it would provide a way of like trying to see what it means to work together. Let's work together and change America in a way in which it can't be identified in any kind of affirmational way. That's what I meant by the term exhausted, like a sort of exhausted idea of the future. It would not be able to be reproductive, right? It wouldn't be able to say, let's go and we'll make children and we'll make the world better. Like it would have to have some other kind of a context.
I think you had a question?
Mary, you spoke earlier to this discussion around the validity of people having ownership or a right to discuss a certain specific identity. And when thinking not just of what the art is, but what it does, could you address what the value, and of course I mean that in like an anti-capitalist way, what the value of commentary on an experience is which one has no first-person insight into? Like in what way can an observation from the outside, or in what way can fact without knowledge of the feeling that comes along with that fact, how can that be productive in a social dialogue?
Yeah, I can stay, within a little bit like within my subject, right, to do this. And I think, for example, within the demographic that I'm pointing towards that are my own, I sometimes, there's decades and decades where they don't have means of their own representation because they're too poor to have cameras and to really have a lot of images made, right? And so the only sort of way that I can look at the surface of them is through academic researchers who visited these communities, that took images of them. And I guess in a sense, maybe it's pathetic, but I feel grateful in a sense for those scraps. And I feel like I can gather those scraps and then turn them back. So sometimes that seems recuperative enough to me when I'm looking at that material. And then I think that sometimes also, sometimes I think there have been moments when someone objectifies even something in ways that's perverse, and I can still turn it. So I can look at Artaud's, for example, really stupid representations of women in his insane asylum drawings, and I can sometimes do something with them. And so even though I think they're fictive and they're stupid, I think that there's something also I can still wrench out of it and move with. So I guess I'm willing for me that there are moments of recuperation, even though I also would say there are moments when I have misstepped and others have, and that it isn't pretty or smart. Yeah.
I'd just like to insert here. You said something along the lines of what does art do, and that was the initial thought in relation to doing something here, to think about what art does, but it seemed too big of a question, which is why we ended up trying to focus on a couple of individual artworks and take it from there instead. And I think for me at the moment that can help us maybe move to where I think your question comes from.
I guess can I add one more thing that draws a line towards tomorrow night, which is that when Naeem and I first met, I wanted to interview him, but the magazine didn't want me to interview you then, and we started this notion of what would an interview look like between us, and I knew what your research materials were, and I'm a very thorough researcher, and I'm able to find things. And I sent you some documents that had to do with like very specific parts of Bangladeshi history, and you wrote back like, "Have you gone through my drawer?" And so in a sense, I don't, it's not my area. But I think that sometimes we can, as artists, also, begin to find things, and then they move between us, and then maybe the other person can do something with it. I think that's also there productively in terms of value. Yeah.
Other voices?
Hi, yes, thank you. I just thought there were just some interesting tensions in the evening's discussion that are worth maybe teasing out a little. One, of course, we're in this discussion about the kind of problematics of overly speaking about the infrastructure of art, this question of survival. We can almost put ourselves on one end of that pole right now, because here we are at e-flux, right, which is often about, which as an art project, right, is about infrastructure and distribution. Think about Pawn Shop or e-flux video rental. These are kind of, right, distribution infrastructure projects. On the other side, there have been moments tonight like, Maria, you at one point compared Doug Ashford's paintings to sort of Byzantine icons, right? And those are warning signals that go flashing off at a moment like that, right? You're like, oh no, are we going back to, if we're going to like go back to the object, are we going back to cult value? Are we sort of repeating modernist autonomy? The idea that the work exists as a singular object only insofar as that it's independent of its infrastructure and surroundings. Is that all we're left with, sort of infrastructure of e-flux or the autonomous object? But in between, right, we've actually had some very interesting thematics between Doug's presentation and Mary about ways of thinking about a relationship to an object that is not the one that is the autonomous one. Of course, there are lots of ways to do that, but what's kind of come out here is work without interpolation, right? Work that's about profound disidentification without a capacity for self-identity or some sort of, one-to-one relationship between the viewer and the work, right? Because both Mary and Doug have this strange disidentification with the social world that they're presenting in their work. There's something jarring, or there's some sort of break or perpendicular with that social world. And also because of the disidentification both of them have with their mediums, right? Both Mary and Doug kind of at different points expressed some ambivalence to even the type of object or medium that they had. One extra aspect of disidentification or lack of identification or troubled identification that hasn't come up yet is your identification as artists. And I wonder, since we're talking about both the kind of maybe the autonomous object, how to survive in the object, what are infrastructures of art, where in all these plays of disidentification, where is your status as an artist?
Can you come live at my house with me? That's like that is actually the most difficult sort of ironic context, because the sort of like idea that the artist through the collaborative, which was part of my experience, or the artist as having a kind of different or distanced relationship in terms of anonymity. My teacher Hans Hacke doesn't let himself be photographed. The idea of trying to, in a sense, refigure the public position of the artist in relationship to these kind of practices is actually the most difficult. Whoever they is, but it's very difficult for me to have an exhibition and I don't have to go, right? The body of the artist, you must know this, is like, in a sense, fetishized in relationship to the production of the work, as is the quote-unquote discourse, right? Constantly recycled into sort of partial quotations in press releases in Chelsea, quoting the same theorists over and over again. And in a sense, it's a kind of production of ornament around the work. I don't know what the solution is, but it is totally in mind. Like, what would it mean to try to be truly anonymous, not fictive? You know, like presenting something that's a fake collaboration, or not, like, and still actually have physical, almost celebrity-like agency within the machinations of the production of artistic value. Like, what would it mean to actually not be present at all? Because if the withdrawal of abstraction is suggesting to us a different kind of idea of activism, if the non-agenda of Occupy, for instance, like, what are we doing? Where are we going? We're already here. We're already doing it. If that possibility is actually exciting to us as artistic producers, what would it mean if we also actually withdraw from its kind of the industrial value of our own presence? It's kind of interesting proposal. But, you know, what about the parking lot at the Kunstverein?
Mary, do you want to?
Can I respond to that? Yeah, I mean, a little shallowly, you know, because there was all these really nice complexities as Doug was admiring of what you said. But if I reduce it, if I'm extremely reductive, and like the problem is the artist is commodity, you know, it's just where is that. I think two things about it right this moment. One is that I agree with Doug that with each context, there becomes a fresh moment of negotiation in terms of how much you want to do that, and how much permission you're given to do that. And so when we're asked for, when we're asked to do something, and then we're asked to provide a bio, right? That becomes one of those moments that most people, because they're too exhausted sometimes, they don't do anything with. You know, they're tired, or maybe they're afraid. But if you're not tired or afraid, that's a moment. And so sometimes what I do is I'll just do a screenshot of search terms from my website. You know, and so and I think strangely enough, one of the number one terms that keeps coming up is like women's asshole, right? And so I'll be like, okay, here's my bio, you know? And sometimes people say, okay, and sometimes they say, no, we really can't do this. And then I could do this other thing where which I find distasteful, which is I am the artist. Like, and so you are going to keep this bio, you know, because I'm actually not interested in that either. You know, so there's these two double negotiations, and so I think that's one space where I feel like I try to figure out what the territory is, and that I can negotiate it each time, hopefully. The other thing that I think is brings us to, you did this move where you said, let's situate us within this institution, this infrastructure. How does e-flux function? What is the discursive in relationship to economy and the capital of the artist? And I had a very uncomfortable conversation with someone recently who has power over me economically, and they said, you think that you are outside of economics, and you're fooling yourself. They said this about me, and so me, the fool, said, what do you mean? And he said, well, it's these things you do like this, and he said, and that's cumulative of value, and that's part of the neoliberal project, and so then I think, okay, maybe he's right. So what do I do now? Uh-oh. You think I don't have an answer yet. This is last week.
That's something to think about, for sure. And I think we should wrap up now. And for tomorrow, let's continue. Discrete art objects, maybe rather than autonomous art objects, implicated in all kinds of contexts and relations, etc. Material, immaterial. I hope that we can touch upon a number of different specific artworks, both here and in the e-flux conversations that will kick off quite soon, where another set of artists has responded to the same question, what does an artwork do? So it's ongoing. Thanks for coming.